Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Did you have a good lunch? Yes, me too. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the GWC GMIC Silicon Valley Big Data UI/UX panel. To most people, big data is a science more than art, and UI/UX is more an art than science. So these few years, because of cheap cloud computing, and we also have the mobile device and smartphones getting cheaper and easier to get to, so we have an explosion of all these. So the topic today is really about how to monetize, how to convert users from the panelists' personal experience. So we're going to be very specific to go into some of those technical details, even including machine learning that we were talking over lunch. So if you guys are interested in this, you're in luck. So before I proceed to introduce the panel, I'd like to have a show of hands to ask how many of you are developers? Please raise your hand. How many of you are designers? Please raise your hand. How many of you are into mobile or any advertising or marketing? A lot of you. And most of you are into mobile, right? Please raise your hand if you're into mobile. Yes, everybody is into mobile. So now we know that these panels, they should be pretty fit for us. And any of you are startups or companies less than maybe 20 or 30 people? So most of you are like that. So on this panel, me and Jeannie, we represent sort of the startups. And Ancestry.com and LinkedIn, they are 900-pound gorillas. So before we proceed, can we have the panel to introduce themselves? Bonnie?
Sure. I'm Bonnie. I'm a data scientist at LinkedIn, and I specifically work primarily on the feed on both the desktop and the mobile app experience. And I am embedded with the product team, so I work very closely with product managers on both the UI side, how we present information to you on the feed, and also on the machine learning algorithmic side of feed relevance, so what content we decide to surface to the member.
I'm Kendall Hulet. I head up product at Ancestry, and I guess in our world, product includes UX as well, and writing, copywriting, and those types of things, user research. So that kind of rolls into my world. And you know, we're kind of evolving as a company. We'll probably talk about this through the course of the session, but kind of moving from family history into almost like a biotech company. So it's a very interesting transition for us.
My name is Jeannie. I head up product and design at Smule. For those of you that don't know Smule, we make social mobile music apps that get you to sing with people all over the world or play piano or auto rap and have fun with it. So what we try to do, in my world, is figure out what the users really want to do and how they want to engage with others in participating and making music. And so for me, day-to-day is really figuring out, I think to what Victor said about combining the art and science, working with the design and product team to figure out how do we actually get the users more engaged in using our products.
I'd also like to introduce myself too. I'm Victor Tong. I started my company back in 1994 in Minnesota. 1997, I sold off to the second wealthiest person in Minnesota and got to become the youngest 40 under 40 in Minnesota. And then a portion of my company, the Pacific portion, Asia portion, become public, and I was running the NASDAQ company for a few years as president and the CEO until the stock market crashed. So I summarize all my bad and ordeal of experience in a book called Angel Investment in Chinese, called 叫天使投资. And the book is now or has been the #1 top seller in angel investing and entrepreneurship in China. So, but for the past couple of years, I've been doing a lot of coding because I got sick and tired of traveling monthly across Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and preaching. So I like to take these evangelizing online. And I think my experience has been taking me to this panel because for the past couple of years, I've been personally doing development in big data, in the distributed database, and also file systems, and looking to machine learning and all these. So I've actually been taking courses online, the Stanford machine learning, so you can see it from YouTube too. And those are into very sophisticated formulas. So do you guys use algorithms to tweak your UI UX? And if you do, how do you use the machine learning to try to better what kind of matrix that you are looking to improve?
I can certainly start on this one. So we use machine learning quite heavily all around LinkedIn, but especially on the feed. There's a feed relevance team that works on the algorithms that decide what content to surface to the member. So every time you come to the feed, we decide what are the most relevant and timely updates from your network that we can show you. And this machine learning, I'm certainly a believer in simple models with very good input. So we spend a lot of time thinking about what features to learn from, what aspects of a member, their past experience, their network, their demographic characteristics that we can feed into these models to decide what to show them.
So we use machine learning quite a bit at Ancestry as well. So let me give you a little background so you can understand how it plays in. The core of our product offering for subscribers is helping them learn more about their family history. So they might tell us a little bit about themselves and start building out a family tree. And behind the scenes, we're looking for historical documents that we've digitized from anywhere from the last 50 years all the way back to 300 or 400 years. And trying to bring the right content to them at the right time at the right place is like a perfect machine learning type of a problem. And so we're building systems that allow us to triangulate on the right data and pull it forward for our users. So that's one place where we use it. The other thing is that behind the scenes, as these people build family trees, we have about 70 million family trees that have been made on our site or our service through the mobile app or on the site. What we're trying to do is actually stitch those together into something that we call the big tree. And that's sort of this, if you want to think of it, the family graph, right? We're trying to figure out how everyone is related. And, that's largely a clustering technique, and that, we originally started off doing our own kind of hand-baked, using our intuition and knowledge, building our own algorithm, but ultimately we've eclipsed that with machine learning.
Yes, I could speak to that. For us, we're building up our machine learning practice. I think to answer the original question, how we can look at how the UI UX mixes with the machine learning underneath is, for the UI UX, it's sort of the framework where the users are going to see content. One way we look at it is how the machine learning is actually bringing the content into the framework. For example, we have a songbook where users select songs to sing. And one of the things that we want to do is recommend songs that are relevant to the users, that's of interest to them. The actual UI UX itself that we actually test is that we actually split through, for example, is the recommended songs doing better to engage the user versus a manually curated top hits section of the song that we do through just what's popular currently in the music category. And so what we do a lot is actually trying to understand how the content, which is what the recommendation is doing, will help the user's engagement. And then we could then understand how, in terms of, for example, in the songbook, between the different sections, what are the sections that are important to show them and go through it from there. So what I guess this might mean for you guys, if you're looking at it, is maybe look at where are the sections of in your UI that the user wants to engage in, and where there might be dynamic content that will actually improve the funnel, improve the experience for the user. And that's sort of how we're looking at how the machine recommendation could help improve the user's experience.
Can you elaborate how much of your user base are mobile versus non-mobile? And also, how do you monetize, or how do you decide what kind of features to fit on such a small form factor of mobile device versus, say, web?
So we're about half and half mobile these days, and mobile is definitely growing incredibly rapidly, especially internationally. In the feed, our main form of monetization is sponsored updates. And so those are mixed into the feed by the feed relevance algorithm, deciding how often to show them. And we also have business rules so that we don't show sponsored content too often. So that sort of constrains the monetization because it's always a trade-off between engagement and monetization. And we really want to make sure that people enjoy their feed experience and feel delighted and engaged by it and come back often.
So a little over half of the people who visit Ancestry or get our app, like half of the people that come to our service are on a mobile device. It's like a little over half now. We actually just crossed that point, and kind of a big deal for us because we've been watching that and trying to make our service even more mobile friendly all the time. So we have a little bit of an older demographic typically, and so they lag a little bit behind, I'd say, of our subscribers. We have over 2 million subscribers, and of those subscribers, about 40% of them are on a mobile device. So that gives you a rough sense. How we decide what to put on a mobile device, because it is a small screen space, it's similar probably, I would guess, to what Jeannie does, but basically we evaluate what are the features that are most heavily used, that seem like the most valuable things, and try and strip away anything that wasn't like really heavily used on the web. And then that's kind of what we make, I guess the features that are most heavily used are the ones that are first and foremost the part of the mobile app. We had like when you're first building a mobile app, you have the opportunity, I guess, to really be thoughtful. And I would encourage all of you, especially all you startup people, you got to keep it really focused. And I think that's the key, is find those features that really matter, and those are the ones that you worry about. And when in doubt, don't include it.
Yeah. So Smule is mobile first. So our user base primarily is mobile because that's where our apps are, that's where people download. We have a website where users come to browse the performances that the users created inside the apps. And so I would say from the website, we actually see 85% of the traffic is all from mobile. And so we design mobile first always. Even from the web, we do responsive design, and we start off with mobile mocks first.
So until recently, I've been traveling back and forth between here and China about once a month. So I've been looking at a lot of different entrepreneurs and these kind of projects or business plans, and also in Japan too. And most of the time that people just focus on the UIUX, and then they forget about that the site needs to make money. So you know that the China stock market just crashed, right? And just now, there are a lot of companies dying left and right, starting to in China. Of course, here we are humming right along pretty well. So I think that the whole thing about UI UX is sort of like a myth, or at least to me, because that if you look at Craigslist, the UI UX is very bad. It's a very bad website. If Craigslist were to show me their business plan, of course, I would know that 10 out of 10 investors would not put a dime into that company. But yet, this company beat all the other startups in terms of all these mobile apps. And I think Craigslist doesn't even have its own app, right? I mean, they are third-party apps. So I think that at the end of the day, it's really about the function or what kind of value that you provide. So what kind of advice would you give to startups like here? I mean, how do you make money? Because more or so, I'm interested in how you can make money. So how do you monetize that? So Kendall, you were talking about the biotech front. Can you try to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I guess, so a couple things. First of all, I would say, it's all about finding what your customers value, right? And I'm a big lean startup fan. And so hypothesis testing is the thing. And so what you want to do is come up with a hypothesis, test it as rapidly and iteratively as possible until you get something that you know is going to work before you go invest heavily in building that feature out, right? So that's kind of the mentality that we're trying to take. We have this mantra at Ancestry. It's think it, test it, build it. And so we don't get to the build it phase until it's actually been through rigorous testing and we have a pretty good idea that that feature is going to pan out. A recent example of kind of success around this, we had an opportunity, I guess. There's a lot of people who are interested in genetics who are also interested in family history because they go hand in hand, right? Your genes are your family history. And so we built out a genetic testing offering. And we've actually have over 1 million people that have taken our genetic test. And that's given us all kinds of really interesting data. So now we can combine all those 70 million trees with all these genomes and start to find interesting patterns and things. And so we're actually able to do lots of cool clustering of data around, so what we'll do is we'll look at all the people that you are related to, and based on your genome, right? Because you all share certain amounts of DNA. And if you share enough, we know how closely you're related. Once we find that cluster of people that you're related to, we start looking in their family trees. And we can find certain ancestors that show up in all of their family trees, and they're related to you, even though you've never started doing any research, built a family tree or anything. We can actually tell you with pretty good level of certainty, we think you might be related to this ancestor. So lots of cool things that kind of allow you to move forward, and we're always just looking what would be the value to the end customer. So again, it's iterative testing over and over and over again until you get something that really works for people.
One of the things I think to think about first is what sort of business model you would like to use. So Smule's been around over 6 years. I've been there over 5 years. We've tried every business model on the App Store, from the initial paper app download to in-app purchases to currently we're on a subscription business model. So I think it's really important to first understand what business model you want to go for. For example, if you're creating an app for pay for download, if they're going to pay you up front, the users will expect a great experience for a period of time that they think that the money they paid is worth. So they're going to be less tolerant for various issues. They're going to have very high expectations. So it's really what kind of experience you want to build. If you're doing a freemium app, you could consider, where are the points where you're going to throw up that paywall, and what does that mean for your engagement experience? And I think that's really critical to test. And that would be critical to test based on the features you think might be engaging, and see whether users pay to unlock that feature. But it's also about which point you bring that up. So I think the important thing is first understand what sort of business model, and to really understand that up front. It is very difficult to change business models midway through. We've also done that, where we've had a free app completely, then thrown up paywalls, or went from in-app purchase to subscription. It's definitely difficult. And my advice would be to have, now that I think there's a lot of examples and models out there, it would be really good to understand that, because that would help you plan how you build your UI UX, how you build your engagement, how you build the features out.
One thing I was going to add to that, sometimes you don't realize where your customers are going to come from. So we built this DNA test with the idea of we're going to sell this to end consumers, and we have been. It's been really great. But what we've actually found is that the data on the back end is of very high value for research purposes. And so you could imagine, as pharmaceutical companies are trying to develop drugs and help people live healthier, better lives, we have an opportunity to, on a de-identified basis, provide data to them that could help them identify genetic triggers for certain conditions or things like that. And so you might be on your second business model. We're actually looking at now B2B customers, and it's a very different business model than what we set out to go after. But it was something that kind of fell into our lap. So you gotta kind of look for that. Maybe your customer isn't who you thought it was going to be in the first place.
LinkedIn certainly has several business models going at the same time. So they're the end users subscribing to the premium service, advertisers, and also recruiters and posting jobs and things like that. And so that's good to have sort of multiple lines of revenue there. But I have to disagree with your statement that Craigslist is terrible, because I know it's not pretty, but I think
I use
what
it
it
all the
does,
time.
what it does so well is present just a singular value proposition in a very simple way, so people can see exactly what it's for, and it does nothing more than that. And that's something that we've worked on for our mobile apps by breaking them out into a suite of several apps that do one small thing quite well. So on the desktop, LinkedIn has many, many different things you can do, but on mobile, if you want to look for a job, there's the job search app. If you want to read content, there's the Pulse app. And so these little slices of experience are really important on mobile.
By the way, I'm also doing some LinkedIn advertisement. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Victor Tong, please connect me.
Nice.
I'm sure that they're also on LinkedIn too. From your experience, what kind of advice would you give to entrepreneurs nowadays of, say, when they don't have that much data to begin with? I mean, they're not like that you have terabytes or petabytes of data that you can train the machine to do those assisted learning. Say, if I just have a startup and I have 3 months of data, some download, a few to a few hundred, I mean, how can I better my app so that more people will download or convert to be user or doing the in-app purchase without that much data?
Okay, so a few ideas. So A/B testing, right? And you can do pretty simple A/B testing, and that is super valuable, and you will learn a ton. We were talking about that quite a bit over lunch. Is that it's cheap and highly valuable. I'd also say, look, I know we're here talking about leveraging data, but there's a lot to your instincts and kind of your intuition based on user testing and watching and observing a lot of users. And so, a key data point is actually just simple observation. So watch users. We've been using this tool recently at Ancestry called Clicktail, and it's kind of cool. You can actually see where a user is tapping or those types of things as they're interacting with something. And so we'll watch lots of Clicktail sessions and just see, oh, what's really going on? Why are they stumbling here? And those types of things are really critical as you're going through that. I guess the last thing I would say is it's never too early to start collecting data and looking through it for patterns. And you don't have to be a data scientist to be able to do that. You can look for things that jump out at you and follow those trends, right?
Yeah, I would say you don't need a lot of data to start learning about what's going on in your product. I remember one of our early products in Magic Piano when we first launched it. This was several years back. We were like, okay, let's just instrument everything. And because we didn't know what questions we wanted to ask, we instrumented everything and we launched it. And it was a new data collection system. And I think within the first week, it brought down our whole back end because we had instrumented back button from the songbook. So users were going back a lot because they're selecting different songs. And that was generating over 64% of all the events. And it just completely brought down our back end. It wasn't useful data because it wasn't really telling us what the users were doing, but we ended up we were instrumenting everything. So I think it's not that you need a lot of data. I think the main thing is you need to know, understand what your funnel is and what you really want to find out about your product. So, I think to add on to that instinct thing, I think you could say, well, what questions will you have about how people are using the product? What would you want to find out when you first release your product? There's going to be some feature you're like, oh my gosh, I wonder what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And sort of there know the questions you want to ask, and then instrument your app to collect those. And you don't need a lot of data to start seeing the funnels, to start seeing what users are using, and then infer and then test and just doing it. Even if you don't have the split testing capability, you have, here's what people did before that feature went out. Here's what people did afterwards. You had to pre and post. People will always say, well, that's not totally scientific because you weren't able to compare right during that time. But when you don't have a lot of data, and split testing is sometimes pretty difficult. Pre and post, especially on simple features and funnels, is actually already really powerful, especially coupled with your intuition about you should know best about what's going on in your product and what you want to find out.
Yeah, I think it's not about the size of the data so much as getting the right data. Yeah. And even though we have many millions of people that we have data from every day, we actually work closely with user experience researchers who might go out and talk to 8 people. And if we pick the right 8 people, that might be just as valuable as having the information from millions and millions. And so we use big data and small data together quite a bit, where I come from the big data side, and I'll help our user experience researchers find the right 8 people to go talk to who are a representative sampling of the user base as a whole for whatever particular characteristic we're looking at. So if we're studying how people share on LinkedIn, I'll look at who's been sharing how much and when, and find 8 people who are representative, and talking to those people is just incredibly insightful.
I totally agree. I would double down on that. For sure, you should watch people use your product, talk to them, ask them questions. You'll learn a ton. I think the one other thing that I would call out, it's less about data. It's more like, what are you solving for? It's like, a lot of times you can collect a lot of data and look for patterns, but if you don't know what you're solving for, like you're like leaning the ladder up against the wrong wall. So really focus on what is your model, what does success look like, and play that out a few steps. Like, if this and we got this, then what? And that's like probably more important than gathering the data in the first place, is making sure you know kind of what you're solving for.
Yeah, I think from the user experience or the user interface, doing the big data analytics about that really gives you a direction of what business model that you should be pursuing. Because I've been telling entrepreneurs, especially in China, and also it's in my book, is that sometimes when you do a startup, your business plan say that you want to go from A to B. But then when you get to B, you will see that B is not really where you want to go. You may want to go to C, and then D, and then E. But when you're just starting at A, you will not be able to see where D or C is. Just like Google did not foresee that advertising is its revenue model. I'm sure that you guys have evolved a lot since you guys first started. So I think that the analytics and eventually the EBITDA or the revenue or profit is what guides us. So for those from China, 盈利模式, 商业模式 is very, very important. These business model is very, very important. But from looking at the data, what kind of surprises have you seen that have just totally thrown you away? So were there surprises, or maybe you guys are just very good scientists that you guys have intuition, just overpower these kind of machine learning data results?
I can. Do you want to go first, or you have one, or you want me to stall for you?
I want to think of a really good one.
Okay.
We are constantly testing our conversion funnel. It's a super important part of our website. And sometimes the things that you learn are pretty obvious, and you're like, in hindsight, oh yeah, of course. Like, for example, one thing we've learned is, the more choices you give a customer, the worse their conversion, because they're sitting there trying to figure out what to do. And so we've observed that and modified our conversion flow based on that. But there are other times where we've rolled out things where we actually reduced the number of fields that a user had to input to give us their credit card information, their billing information, and conversion went down. And it's completely counterintuitive. And you're like, what in the world's going on? We asked you to give us less information, and then that hurt conversion. Then you got to get really creative and look into what's happening here. Did that change what they were seeing on the page that then gave them a different psychological thing? And so for me, we just did a test. I thought it was going to slam dunk, huge conversion win, and it hurt conversion. And so it was a big surprise. So you kind of never know. Even things that seem super obvious may surprise you.
Yeah, we have definitely, I think some of the things that have surprised us just, I think we design and we're like, oh, this is going to be a beautiful screen. The users are going to love it. We have a pretty button with graphics. And it was one of the screens where we were trying to encourage users to either, join us on for free or subscribe. And we actually try to make one more appealing than the other. And it turns out that the simpler button, which is a straight up button where we're like, well, that's kind of hard to read in text actually allow the users to click through more and actually attach more. And so, but yet the other screen had, the value proposition, maybe a better visual design. And so I think sometimes those are surprising because we maybe get into a bit of like, as we're looking at the product so often ourselves, and we've actually taken every opportunity to pick at every point that might be wrong. And for the users, for them, I think my interpretation is that they're going through it really fast, and they want to just get to the point as soon as possible. Maybe that's actually back to the Craigslist aspect. They just want to get to as fast as possible. And how to get there without this cognitive overload is actually something to be aware of. So
I guess I have a surprise from the feed, which is that we looked into feed inventory, so how much content we have available to show a user each time they come to the feed. And we started from the premise that LinkedIn employees all have wonderful feeds because we're very connected. We have lots of people in our network, always good stuff to see. But we expected that new users who aren't very connected would have almost nothing to see that was fresh. But power users who come all the time would have tons of content. And what we actually found is that some of our power users come to the site so often that they run out of new content even though they're very well connected. And so there are people out there who are coming to the site every single day who don't have new things to see in their feed necessarily when they come. And so this was a underserved group that was kind of surprising to find.
So we have about maybe 13 minutes left. And before we go to the Q&A, do you have any things to add to this panel before we open it up?
I'll start. I think one of the things is one of the things that we've learned and continue to learn is that you could get you're looking at the data every day. You're looking at how your engagement, your retention, your monetization is like moving up and down every day. And then when something goes down, you kind of dig through and go through the product and go, what went wrong with the product? And sometimes something macro is happening in the world that the users' lives are involved in. One of the things that we've learned is that seasonality actually affects our users' engagement and attach quite a lot. Summer period, lots of kids at home have a lot of time on their hands. September, back to school, both the kids and parents are busy, usage drops, and that affects our engagement and monetization. We definitely spent a few cycles going, what happened, what's going on, and then going, okay, wait, there are events happening in the world. The users have lives outside of the app. So I think one of the things I would say is there's a lot of data to look at. There's like a lot of focus on your own product, but sometimes also just being aware of like what's happening in the world, the ecosystem, what the users might be dealing with in their life that's surrounding their whole usage is helpful to understand. I think that just gives you a better overall picture of what's going on.
I guess I would just emphasize that I think when you're going to make changes, generate a hypothesis, like literally write it down. It takes discipline to do that because a lot of times you kind of know what you're trying to do, but like write it down, write down what, like at Ancestry we use OKRs, that's the objectives and key results, but write down what the outcome that you're seeking should be, and then hold yourself accountable to that. Sometimes the beautiful design that you love won't win, and you have to kill your darlings, and that's an important part of building a great product is just, I guess, being disciplined and holding yourselves accountable to those things.
So I'm very much a data evangelist, so I just wanted to make sure and point out how everyone can use data throughout every step of the design process when you're changing UI or UX. So from the very beginning, if you're hatching an idea for a new feature, you can do scoping analysis to figure out how big is the market for this feature, how many people will see it if we add it to the site, is it worth building? And then once the feature is built, definitely A/B testing, deciding is this feature superior, using clearly defined success metrics. As you say, pick what it means to win before you start, or you won't know if you've won. And then finally, after a feature is launched and has been out there in the wild for a while, thinking about analyzing how people are using it to identify ways to improve it. So flow analysis, funnel analysis, looking at where people are dropping off or what parts of a feature they're not using. So really bringing data all the way through every step of the design process, I think, can be incredibly valuable.
I guess for me personally, my background has always been on the data side or from the server side. Before I started my company, in 1993, I worked at American Express Financial Advisor in the data administration group, working with those strategic advisors and IBM consulting group people coming in and structure all those data and about those data modeling and this and that. And then I went on to work at Anderson Consulting, also huge data. We had the largest, so we had the largest Sybase database installment in the world back then. So I think that looking fast forward to machine learning and all these analytics, I think a lot of work has to go into the formatting of the data, structuring of the data, massaging the data, and all these things. So all these things are still like 20 or 30 years old technology, and I think that we have to back to the basics sometimes in order to fast forward. So anyway, we have 8 minutes or 9 minutes for Q&A. Does anybody have any question for our very experienced panel? Raise your hand, please. Yeah, so we have a person at the back.
Hello, can you tell us about some of the tools that have been helpful in doing some of these types of analytics, especially given increasing volumes of data and complexity of a lot of these queries? Thanks.
So we use Hadoop quite extensively and use Pig to query our large data sets, and also Hive and Spark and pretty much every Hadoop tool. I like to, when possible, use Hadoop to take a sample of the data and then take it into R or some other tool that's really optimized for sort of data exploration and visualization. And then once I have a handle on what I think the data looks like, take it back to the full-sized Hadoop scale data and validate that the trend holds for the whole data set.
I'd say we're similar, lots of Hadoop type stuff. But in terms of like maybe other tools that weren't mentioned, like we use like Test and Target. I think it's an Adobe product to set up a lot of our A/B tests, like Site Catalyst, Omniture, those types of things, or Google Analytics, right? You're kind of looking at web analytics as a thing. And you can build that into your mobile app just as well. It can fire events, all those types of things. I'm trying to think of other tools. So like this is more on the like not on the big data side, but on the little stuff. Like we'll use things like we'll do user intercepts where a pop-up will fire on the site. I can't remember the name of the tool off the top of my head that does that. I'm sorry, but and we'll recruit a user and watch their session live while they're using the product. And we'll be able to observe them and kind of interact with them. So a bunch of things like that help us.
So very similar. So I'll just add that we use Excel a lot. When you export the data, we still, for I think the product manager side, I think the data analyst side are probably much better with the SQL query. So we're fortunate we have a data analyst team that could actually pull the data out. But Excel is still quite powerful for us in actually just going through, quickly graphing something out, quickly looking at the chart of it, because sometimes you have all this data, just actually quickly visualizing it is really helpful. And so if you could somehow just export the data and visualize it, you might see trends that you may not just see if you're staring at columns of data.
Another cool tool we use is Tableau. So that's another data visualization tool.
Yeah, sometimes my advice to entrepreneurs is that if you don't have a whole lot of data, don't even need to learn about Hadoop and all these things, So it's sort of like me back in 10, 15 years ago. I went to a very large data center in China. Those governments love to spend money to buy the latest Oracle, the latest Sun Spark 2000 or 8000. And then I asked them how many rows of data they had, and then they said that so that they didn't know first, so they have to go to the back room and ask for the system administrator. And then the system administrator said that maybe a few hundred rows. So then I said that, gee, I could have done that with my 386, back then. So normal usage, Excel and all these things, it's just very powerful, that they build a lot of cool analytics into that. So we don't have to go to pivot the table and all these things. But when you reach a large amount of data, then I think that is very useful for Hadoop. But for machine learning side, do you guys use MATLAB, R, or the open source equivalent?
We use in-house built pipelines.
Okay, in-house built, good. Okay, so the next question.
Is it over there?
Just bring in a
Sure.
mic.
So, and then you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so since you guys are in a position where you can look at where this sort of stuff is going with data and changing things, do you know how like BuzzFeed just kind of tests their entire articles A/B and it almost like writes itself that way? Do you ethically, do you think there's anything funny about just not even deciding where things go and just giving people what they want?
So I have strong feelings about this. So I think we need to avoid clickbait. I feel like just A/B testing everything and going with whatever has more clicks or views is a dangerous path to walk, and it's always important to keep intuition in mind and to decide whether you're bringing more value to the consumer of your site or information.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like ultimately your product needs to do something that makes people's lives better in some way. And like, at least I always have tried to work at places where I feel like the thing I do is good for the world, right? And so like, I think if you do the right things and build the right type of stuff that's focused on real value, those are the companies that will stand the test of time.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think what BuzzFeed is doing, though, is they're optimizing for one metric. And I think if you do that, you perhaps lose sight of the bigger picture. They're optimizing for a metric to get the clickbait, to get people onto it. But potentially, if they're looking deeper at engagement, retention, how many other articles the user moves on to, that would present a different picture, a different story. And I think it's really about what you're optimizing for. But generally agree with all the sentiment about you have to design for a good user experience that's meaningful to the user, because otherwise it won't be sustainable or long-lasting.
Okay.
So, Kendall, you particularly mentioned think it, test it, build it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering, in your organization, and the others can please also chime in, where do you get the beginning of that funnel? How do you gather ideas for new features, et cetera? Where do they come from?
I would say a lot of it is user observation, right? So as you watch people, you see, and you start asking, what are you trying to do? Why are you trying to do that? Oh, well, why would that matter to you, right? And those types of things really like open you up to new perspectives and different ways of seeing things. I'd say, secondly, you're always looking for new ways to make money, and that, like, necessity is the mother of invention, or whatever the phrase is, right? And so, certainly, it gives you a chance to be creative. I'd say the third thing is, like, look for ideas. Like, in product, I'm in product. I think you're in product, right? Like, there's this tendency to think, oh, we come up with the ideas. That's what we do. But like, what I found is that there's no monopoly on great ideas, and engineers have awesome ideas. Customers have awesome ideas. Lots of people, and so it's harnessing all of these great ideas from around you and figuring out which can add real business value. So, and then for us, it's experimentation, because maybe that idea seems crazy, maybe it doesn't. Let's test it. And, that's the equalizer, right? Otherwise, my opinion,
Do you have anything to add? A few seconds.
I guess our ideas come from everywhere and everyone and everything that we can possibly draw them from. And a big one is sort of free text inputs on customer satisfaction surveys, or people filing help tickets with the site We have people who comb through all of this and look for trends, and then we can sort of identify unmet needs and come up with new product features to meet those needs.
Yeah, I would say the ideas come from all sources, and they're all usually good ideas. The hard part is figuring out how to prioritize which one you implement to do the experimentation and test, because they all take time, and then that adds up. So really the harder part is how do you distill and all these ideas, make sure that they're aligned with the business goals, and make sure that priority is clear to figure out which one you actually work on. So that's the more difficult part.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I guess you guys still have a lot of burning questions for the esteemed panelists. So at least I will make myself available right outside after we take off all these fancy microphones at the back. So for any one of you who would like to meet with me or the other panelists, please proceed outside in a few minutes. Thank you very much, and that's it. Thank you.